March 1968. A Soviet nuclear-armed submarine, the K-129, misses a mandatory, heavily encrypted check-in. Then, the silence continues. Panic instantly grips the Soviet Pacific Fleet. A nuclear-armed strategic asset carrying 3 ballistic missiles, each armed with a 1-megaton warhead, has simply vanished from the ocean. The Soviets mobilize a massive naval strike group, fleet destroyers and Soviet spy ships sweeping the ocean for a single rogue transmission. They find absolutely nothing. No debris, no oil slick. To the world, the K-129 vanished. But to the CIA, it was the ultimate opportunity. This is the story of the mysterious disaster of the K-129 and the most audacious billion-dollar heist in naval history. The K-129 was a ghost, but it was a ghost with a heartbeat. As a diesel-electric sub, it was trapped in a lethal cycle: surface, recharge, submerge. It was forced into a highly vulnerable state during lengthy battery recharge cycles, running its noisy diesel engines at the surface just to breathe life back into its batteries. In those moments, this invisible superweapon became the loudest target in the Pacific. The Soviet High Command is terrified. They assume the absolute worst. They assume the Americans sank it. In the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, the Soviet Union was desperate for answers, and their intelligence agencies quickly locked onto a prime suspect: the USS Swordfish. The Swordfish was an American nuclear-powered attack submarine, and crucially, it was known to be operating in the Western Pacific Theater during the exact time frame the K-129 went missing. Therefore, the Soviets developed a prevailing theory. The American sub had been covertly trailing the K-129 and either accidentally or deliberately rammed it, sending the Soviet Leviathan to the bottom. And the Soviets had photographic evidence to back it up. Just days after the K-129 vanished, the USS Swordfish pulled into a naval base in Yokosuka, Japan. It displayed highly visible, significant structural damage. Its electronic countermeasures mast was sheared off, and its primary attack periscope was bent backward at a severe 45-degree angle. The tension between the two superpowers reached a boiling point. The Soviet fleet was on high alert. The world was standing on the razor-thin edge of World War III. Impact mechanics. If a submarine rams a 2,700-ton vessel with enough force to sink it, the impact would have completely crushed the sub's forward sonar dome and cracked the sub's steel hull, instantly flooding the forward compartment. A bent periscope and sheared mast indicate a high-angle, low-mass surface strike. The physics simply didn't match the accusation. Decades later, declassified acoustic data proved the Swordfish was 2,000 miles away. Its mast was smashed by surfacing through drifting pack ice, not by crushing a Soviet submarine. There was no collision. The American sub never touched it. At least, not this time. Because while the K-129 wasn't a victim of a deliberate ramming, the era of metal-shredding collisions was just beginning. Later, a different American ship would shred a Soviet vessel in a disaster that nearly triggered a catastrophic radiological nightmare. But that is a story for the end of this video. Because right now, the question remains, what actually killed 98 men in the dark? With the collision theory dead in the water, the Soviets offered an official explanation: a catastrophic mechanical failure during a routine battery recharge. Their report focused on a flooding accident at snorkel depth. But a more insidious and well-documented theory soon took hold: a massive hydrogen explosion in the K-129's own batteries. Diesel submarines use massive lead-acid battery banks that vent highly explosive hydrogen while charging, but to run those chargers, the sub has to be snorkeling just below the surface. If a fire broke out, they were already seconds away from the surface. A trained crew would have executed an emergency blow and fought for their lives, not died in silence. The K-129 didn't fight. It didn't send a single distress call. It went down silently, and it went down instantly. Therefore, intelligence analysts and independent researchers began looking closely at the specific anomalies of the patrol, and there were two massive, glaring discrepancies. First, the wreckage was found significantly outside its designated operational box. It was hundreds of miles off its authorized patrol route, sitting entirely in the wrong part of the Pacific. Second, the crew manifest was completely wrong. The standard complement for a Project 629A submarine, what NATO called the Gulf II, was 83 personnel. But the K-129 sailed with 98 hands. It was carrying up to 15 extra, undocumented personnel. Officially, Soviet naval doctrine states these were junior trainees and a routine signals intelligence team. But some researchers believe they were something much, much darker. These anomalies gave rise to a chilling, albeit heavily contested theory, popularized decades later by the 2005 book Red Star Rogue. According to this highly speculative fringe theory, those undocumented personnel were not junior trainees. They were a highly trained covert cell of KGB operatives. The theory posits that these operatives hijacked the K-129, seizing the command center and sealing the actual crew behind heavy, watertight steel doors. Their objective was apocalyptic. They intended to bypass the vessel's standard naval chain of command, maneuver the submarine close to the Hawaiian Islands, and launch an R-21 ballistic missile armed with a 1-megaton warhead directly at the United States Pacific Fleet headquarters in Pearl Harbor. By utilizing an older diesel-electric submarine, the theory suggests the KGB operatives hoped its acoustic signature would mimic a Chinese vessel, thereby provoking a massive, retaliatory U.S. nuclear strike against the Soviet Union's geopolitical rival in Beijing. But Soviet engineers had anticipated the terrifying risk of a hijacked nuclear asset. The ballistic missile systems were reportedly equipped with severe, automated electromechanical failsafes.
Огонь торпедами!
If the launch computers detected an unauthorized firing sequence, meaning the operatives attempted to launch without the cryptographically verified master codes from Moscow, the submarine would actively defend itself. It wouldn't just shut the computers down. It would execute a localized self-destruct to physically prevent World War III.
Liquid propellant detonation. The R-21 missiles utilized highly volatile, corrosive liquid propellants. The failsafe protocol involved a specialized shaped charge designed to breach the fuel tanks. The failsafe shattered the tanks, mixing highly volatile rocket chemicals that instantly exploded inside the launch tube. Therefore, the rogue launch was instantly aborted by a catastrophic internal shockwave. The automated failsafe triggered a relatively low-yield chemical explosion that blew a massive hole straight through the pressure hull without detonating the warhead. The explosive force took the path of least resistance, venting outward into the ocean rather than cracking the armored re-entry vehicles protecting the nuclear payloads. Catastrophic flooding equalized the pressure at depth, instantly turning the 2,700-ton Leviathan into a dead weight. But a flooded 2,700-ton cylinder doesn't drop like a stone. The ocean is 800 times denser than air. Hydrodynamic drag and instability took over. The K-129 tumbled and spiraled violently, tearing itself apart under immense shear forces long before it ever hit the bottom. It is absolutely critical to note that mainstream naval historians heavily dispute this rogue KGB theory. They cite geographic range limits and specific acoustic data that points toward a more mundane, tragic mechanical leak of that same corrosive missile fuel. But whether it was an apocalyptic KGB hijacking thwarted by a mechanical failsafe or a catastrophic equipment failure, the end result was exactly the same. The
the K-129 was sitting 3 miles down, packed with intact nuclear warheads, Soviet torpedoes, and the ultimate geopolitical prize, the master cryptographic codebooks. And the United States Navy was the only one who knew exactly where it was.
While the Soviets searched blindly, the Americans were watching from the shadows, specifically from the 5th floor of the Pentagon. Hidden behind layers of classification was the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, specifically the Special Projects Staff, SPS, operating so covertly that even the building's most senior officials weren't cleared to know what they were building. They didn't find the wreck on the first pass. The ocean is deafeningly noisy, and the violent acoustic spike of the submarine dying was initially buried in miles of unread tape. It took a retroactive forensic hunt to finally isolate the good-sized bang that gave away the K-129's final resting place. Therefore, the U.S. Navy sent a specialized submarine, the USS Halibut, to find it. The Halibut found the K-129 resting 16,500 feet down. And when the photographic information was analyzed back in Washington, D.C., the CIA's priorities immediately shifted. They didn't care about the anomalies. They didn't care about why the submarine sank. They only cared about what survived the descent. The explosion had breached the hull and killed the crew. But the primary strategic prizes were miraculously intact. The nuclear ballistic missiles were sitting in their launch tubes. The forward torpedo room was intact. And most importantly, the master cryptographic codebooks were buried inside the twisted metal. Deep inside a clandestine mission control in Los Angeles, intelligence operators realized they weren't dealing with a forensic mystery anymore. They were looking at the ultimate Cold War jackpot. They just had to figure out how to steal a 2,000-ton nuclear-armed submarine from 3 miles deep without the Soviet Union noticing.
To execute the heist, the CIA initiated Project Azorian. It was a staggering $800 million endeavor, equivalent to nearly $4 billion today. They needed to build a ship capable of lifting 2,000 tons of dead weight from a depth of 16,500 feet. But they couldn't build it in secret. Therefore, they needed a cover story. The CIA enlisted the cooperation of eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. The public narrative was brilliant. Hughes was building the Glomar Explorer, a massive commercial mining vessel designed to harvest valuable manganese nodules from the ocean floor. It was the perfect disguise for a colossal, highly visible engineering project. The technical specifications of the Glomar Explorer were absurd. The ship was equipped with an advanced heave compensator. This massive hydraulic system acted as a shock absorber, neutralizing the violent up and down heave of the ocean swells from the lift mechanism. Dynamic shock loading. A single massive ocean swell would spike the acceleration and instantly snap the steel pipe. Instead, the compensator acted as a colossal mechanical counterweight, instantly slackening and pulling to match the ocean's rhythm, keeping the massive lifting tension hovering just barely within the steel's breaking point, regardless of the weather above. But the most critical piece of engineering wasn't the ship. It was the claw. Officially designated the capture vehicle, the engineers nicknamed it Clementine. It was a 1,600-ton capture vehicle, utilizing a series of structurally independent, hydraulically actuated lifting tines designed to cradle the pressure hull of the K-129. Because a claw that massive couldn't be built openly without arousing Soviet satellite suspicion, it was constructed covertly inside a submersible barge in San Diego and secretly loaded up into the belly of the Glomar Explorer from underwater. In the summer of 1974, the Glomar Explorer arrived at the site. Despite being shadowed by curious Soviet naval vessels, the crew managed to lower Clementine to the seafloor by meticulously threading together 60-foot sections of heavy-duty steel pipe. The tension on the Explorer was radioactive. For 2 weeks, a Soviet tugboat circled them, close enough to see the sweat on the American sailors' faces. The CIA prepared extreme emergency destruction measures, arming thermite charges and positioning heavy iron safes ready to dump every scrap of classified data into the abyss if the Soviets boarded. But the standoff ended with a bizarre display of Cold War defiance. As the Soviet vessel finally ran low on fuel and turned for home, dozens of Soviet sailors lined the deck, dropped their trousers, and mooned the billion-dollar American ship. A crude, human punchline to a high-stakes game of cat and mouse.
Эй, американцы! Как погода наверху?
The heist was on. Clementine locked its massive jaws around the K-129. The billion-dollar lift began.
August 1974. The Glomar Explorer began the agonizingly slow ascent. Clementine had locked its jaws around the forward two-thirds of the K-129. But hauling 2,000 tons of jagged, weakened steel through 3 miles of water is a brutal fight against deep ocean drag and the absolute breaking point of the lifting steel. When the target object was approximately halfway to the surface, the mangled steel of the submarine shifted. This is where 2 vastly different engineering philosophies fatally collided. Ruggedization versus precision. The hull wasn't the over-engineered masterpiece the Pentagon expected, but that was by design. The steel plates were uneven and balanced with raw lead pigs because the Soviets prioritized rapid, mass-produced buoyancy over the tight tolerances of American labs. It wasn't clean engineering. It was brute force reliability meant to be fixed with a sledgehammer in a Siberian port. A brutalist philosophy of war. While the Americans built a Swiss watch, the Soviets built a tank that could dive to 1,000 feet. The American engineers designed Clementine with incredibly tight tolerances, expecting to safely cradle a perfectly uniform cylinder. But because of the K-129's brutalist engineering, the rigid American claw couldn't grip the hull evenly. The shifting weight and dynamic loading focused entirely on a few localized, critical stress points. According to heavily redacted official CIA reports, the sheer mechanical physics overpowered the steel. The narrative states that several of Clementine's heavy steel beams snapped under the immense stress. As the jaws allegedly gave way, the weakened hull didn't just snap, it crumbled under the massive shear force. The official story claims that over 100 feet of the target object shattered and tore free, sending the missile compartment and the master cryptographic codebooks plunging back to the ocean floor. According to the file, they had lost the jackpot. Therefore, the CIA was forced to settle for a partial success. They managed to winch up the remaining 38-foot forward section of the bow, securing it inside the Glomar Explorer's internal moon pool. It was an unparalleled feat of deep ocean engineering, but an official intelligence letdown. Or at least that is the highly convenient story the CIA desperately needed the Soviet Union to believe. Think about the strategic reality. If the Americans actually did recover the master cryptographic codebooks, the absolute worst thing they could do is admit it. The moment the Soviets knew their ciphers were compromised, they would instantly change their entire global communications network overnight. But by claiming the claw broke and the jackpot was lost to the abyss, the CIA effectively told Moscow, "We tried, but your secrets are still safe at the bottom of the ocean." Was it truly a catastrophic engineering failure, or was the broken claw the most brilliant, perfectly executed cover story in intelligence history? The world only found out because the press eventually leaked the mission in 1975, forcing the CIA to invent their now famous response, "We can neither confirm nor deny." To this day, the true contents of the Glomar Explorer's moon pool remain heavily classified,
making it one of the most fiercely debated mysteries of the Cold War.
But amid the lead and the radiated steel they did recover, they found a personal tragedy. Inside a locker was a camera belonging to a Soviet officer. When the CIA examined the camera, it held no secret blueprints, just the mundane human remnants of the man who once held it, and whose family would never be told why he never came home.
Inside that twisted, dripping metal, they found something that instantly halted the intelligence operation and brought the reality of the Cold War into sharp focus. They found the bodies of 6 Soviet submariners. Despite the intense, apocalyptic geopolitical animosity between the United States and the Soviet Union, the CIA and the crew of the Glomar explorer treated the deceased enemy personnel with profound, absolute respect. On September 4th, 1974, they conducted a highly classified burial at sea in the dead of night. They wrapped the bodies in Soviet naval ensigns. The ceremony closely mirrored actual Soviet Navy burial traditions. A CIA operative stepped forward to deliver a translated Russian benediction, honoring the men of pendant number 722. And over the dark, freezing waters of the Pacific, the Soviet national anthem played from the deck of an American intelligence ship.
The ceremony will now begin. Attention to the national anthems of the United States and the Soviet Union.
This service is being conducted to honor Viktor Lokov, Vladimir Kosciuszko, Valentin Nosichev, and 3 other unidentified Soviet submariners who perished in March of 1968 in the North Pacific Ocean when their ship suffered a casualty of unknown origin. In a very real way, this ceremony has resulted from the continuing contentions between our 2 nations. Their casualty happened at a time when they were engaged in activities which they deemed to be in their national interests and protection. Their bodies have come into our possession some 6 years later through activities on behalf of our country which we feel fit the same criteria. The fact that our nations have had disagreements does not lessen in any way our respect for them and the service they have rendered. And so, as we return their mortal remains to the deep, we do so in a way that we hope would have had meaning to them, and clothed with the representative portion of the ship on which they served and perished. As long as men and nations are suspicious of each other, instruments of war will be constructed, and brave men will die, as these men have died in the service of their country. Today we honor these 6 men, their shipmates, and all men who give their lives in patriotic service. May the day quickly come when men will beat their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, and nation shall not rise up against nation, neither shall there be war anymore.
We know neither the exact burial at sea ceremony of the Soviet Navy or the specific desires of what form a service these men might have desired. Accordingly, we have constructed a ceremony which we believe to be the closest approaching the actual Soviet ceremony. Our intent is to preserve the meaning and symbolism of such a solemn occasion. In addition, United States Navy ceremony for the burial of the dead at sea will follow. Eternal Father, we who go down to the sea in ships are ever in search of a safe haven at the end of the journey. The officers and men of this ill-fated USSR submarine, pendant number 722, who we honor here today, have reached their journey's end. To you, we entrust them, that they may find peace and contentment in their repose.
Господи, те из нас, плавающие на море кораблями, всегда ищем безопасную гавань у конца плавания. Офицеры и моряки этой злополученной лодки СССР ПЛ-722, которой мы сегодня отдаем честь, достигли конца плавания. Вам мы их поручим, чтобы они нашли мир и довольство, спокойствие.
We therefore commit these crew members of this ship to a proper resting place to join the Valhalla of sea heroes who have gone before them. We commit their remains to the deep, looking for the resurrection of the body, when the sea shall give up her dead and the life of the world to come. Amen. At this time, please close the doors to the vault. Commence the hoist.
The bodies were committed to the deep, and the entire 14-minute ceremony was filmed. Decades later, that tape was handed directly to the Russian president to provide closure to the families who never knew what happened in 1968. The official story leaves the USS Swordfish out of it, and based on the mechanical forensics, they were absolutely right. But deliberate metal-shredding collisions between these two superpowers weren't just paranoid theories. They were actively happening. Just a few years later, the American surface warship USS Vosges violently shredded a Soviet Echo-2 class submarine, ripping straight into a hull loaded with active nuclear reactors and armed warheads. It wasn't a mechanical failure, and it wasn't a deliberate attack. It was a catastrophic collapse of situational awareness and deadly tunnel vision. To see the exact kinetic metal-on-metal trauma of that disaster, click the video on your screen.